All right, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation on cybersecurity, national security, and the power of personal mission at Amulya's Corner. We're honored to be joined by Kris Lovejoy, Global Practice Leader for Security and Resiliency at Kyndryl, a military spouse and a self-taught cybersecurity pioneer with decades of leadership in both the public and private sectors. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Kris, your story is deeply rooted in resilience and service, from being a military spouse to becoming a global cybersecurity leader. Let's start at the beginning. What kind of drew you into the world of cybersecurity, and how has your personal journey shaped your mission to protect?
I was not drawn to cybersecurity actually. I was married and I was living in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and I was bored out of my mind. I had two kids, but had and they were keeping me busy. But I had been working before I had moved to Jacksonville, and I was, as I said, really bored. And so I started doing a lot of volunteering. And one of the things I was doing is running. I was running a soup kitchen, and I was running this program for the wives of deployed Marines at the time. And at that time, women were really not part of the Marine Corps. And I read this book about, the internet and how you can use the internet for communicating over long distances. And I thought, wow, this could be really cool to enable the spouses to talk to their husbands while they were on deployment. And then when we got transferred to DC, I took that network engineering skill that I just built on my own. I got a job at a consulting company, and they put me at the NSA, weirdly enough. And that's how I learned about cybersecurity.
Got you. So it was a very unconventional approach into entering cybersecurity. That's really fascinating because I'm majoring in software engineering. And so I think of security as one of the biggest up and coming paths. And so I wanted to ask you because as a college student, sometimes cybersecurity can feel a little intimidating, especially for those without a technical background. What were some of the biggest hurdles you faced and how did you push through?
Oh, so it's interesting. The biggest challenge in security, it doesn't turn out to be a technical one. It turns out to be just a simple reality that it is very hard to explain to executives why they need to spend money on security to avoid something that has not they've not experienced. And it is and that at the end of the day, in order for you to implement security and configure security, you have to buy something, you have to hire somebody, you have to have somebody do something that they largely don't want to do. You're going to slow them down,
Mhm.
right? Security is a set of guardrails that ultimately will enable you to do things in a better way, and the quality of the output will be better. But convincing somebody to slow down, convincing them to use additional security tools to go through the checks, it is really hard, and
Mhm.
people don't want to do it.
Well, Kris, I can tell you I'm convinced. And at Girl Security, we define national security not just as protecting borders, but as protecting people and systems. So you've led security practices at some of the world's largest organizations. From that lens, what's one lesson about resilience that applies across both public and private sectors?
A lot of younger security officers that I meet, they are very convinced that there's the right way and the wrong way to do things, and oftentimes the right way is by investing lots and lots of money in very high tech tools.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, I found is it's better to be better. It's better to be best at the basics than to invest in a lot of the high tech stuff.
Mhm.
That it is, if you think about, technology and kind of what the why the attackers get inside, it's not because they're using highly sophisticated means. They're phishing.
Mhm.
They're getting access to credentials. They're getting into the systems. They're exploiting known vulnerabilities. And so it is a combination of training people. It's putting good endpoint protection on, people's devices. It's making sure that you have, effective, yes, perimeter security. I'm saying it like firewalls, making sure that you've got good monitoring and logging, making sure that you've got vulnerability management, patch management, configuration management. Most important of all, having good asset management so that you know what you're supposed to protect. All those things are the basics.
The basics.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about like the cyber threats becoming more frequent and maybe even more complex, and that trust in institutions are on the decline. So how do we ensure that our national security efforts remain human-centered?
It's really interesting because, even just over the past few months, I've been hearing a lot of people talking about data security. And, it's funny because, years and years ago, we went from this world where we talked about cybersecurity, which was systems and information. And then we turned to information security because we said, you know what, the systems really don't matter. It's the data that matters. Then we came back to cybersecurity when we said, you know what, it is the systems and the data. So we need to think about this holistically. We're coming back around again on data security. And it's interesting why, because if you think about data in the age of AI, if you would ask me 5 years ago, Kris, how do you protect your data? And I tell you, first thing you have to realize is that not all data is made equally. There are crown jewels, and then there's data you don't care about. And the crown jewels, you want to identify it, you want to assess it to understand the vulnerabilities, you want to protect it, you want to monitor it, and you want to be able to recover it. Very simple. Now, in the age of AI, disparate data sources, elements of data come together, they combine together to create sensitive, private, or national security or information that is so sensitive it must be secured.
Mhm.
And you don't know when that's going to happen. It happens dynamically.
Mhm.
And so if you think about what does data security mean, it's not that you can forecast what data is going to come together to create the risk. You actually have to go forth and proactively define the use cases and test those use cases again and again and again. You also have to understand how people are going to be using that data so that they can spot when it comes together and it creates a risk. So it's creating a total change dynamic because all the technology we had in place before doesn't work.
Right.
So we've got to think about things differently. One of the things I always advise in security is you must lean into new technology.
Yes.
You
Mhm.
have to be on the vanguard of understanding it, of playing with it, on testing it. I can tell you every time something like, new VR glasses come out, I buy them.
Mhm.
Anytime there's a book on, quantum, I buy it and I read it. You've got to understand the technology because people are going to use it. Your
Mhm.
job is to understand what the potential risk of using that technology is and to make sure that you're thinking about the, sort of the use of that technology in your business and how, or your organization, what the risks are and how to mitigate them. If you don't do it, I can tell you somebody in the organization is going to do it, but they're not going to be doing it with security in mind.
Mhm.
So my side note is for those of you who may be in an institution where they're kind of, creating that, like, the boundary, I'd
Mhm.
say privately lean in, figure it out.
Mhm.
Because it is coming. And, this is an unstoppable train. And we really, really need to get our heads around it. And that's why we need the security folks that are coming out of university today to be the entrepreneurs when it comes to the use of these technologies, because we need people to test in real world circumstances the use of these things and help guide us on how we can keep these things from becoming problems,
Mhm.
instead becoming tools for good.
Right. And that actually kind of leads up to my next question a little bit. So you helped reimagine what leadership can look like in security, and you did it without a traditional tech pedigree. What would you say to young women or non-traditional learners who don't necessarily fit the mold but want to lead in a field like this?
Yeah, and again, going back to AI, and I really do believe that a liberal arts background or the capacity, or even if it's not a firm background, at just the ability to engage in different forms of thinking, analytical thinking, is critically important because the value that the human brings in this world is the ability to ask better questions,
Mhm.
to ask questions about ethics, morality, to
Mhm.
ask questions about how humans are likely to use different kinds of technologies under different circumstances, to ask questions about how these different complex systems are going to come together to form risk. And the AI today, the way it's being implemented is in very, very specific use cases. And so I think, and I don't know whether this is what I'm talking about is more of a temporal thing, and that, over the next 10 to 20 years, what we're going to need are people that are going to fit the gap, between today and then the world is going to look like in 20 years. But
Right.
all I know is having that ability to ask better questions
Mm-hmm.
is you have to have that background. So if that means pick up a philosophy book, take a philosophy class, read a book, go engage in conversations with your peers, take a class in psychology. I don't know what it is, but you have to learn to engage in communities and ask those questions and really think about what's happening, why it's happening, what's your role in that, in order for you to be successful in this industry.
Yeah, I very much agree with your holistic approach because I sometimes think that we can pigeonhole ourselves into an industry, a topic, a field, and not really understand on a broader lens why it's so pivotal to interact with community, to interact with peers, to experience diversity, because those decisions help inform you to make better security principles. So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and you said something, by the way, you were talking about how, before we got on, you were talking about, COVID, and how just, seeing that disinformation, come through was, it was kind of like, wow, this is really happening. And then seeing it being amplified, using digital means. It's a good example of kind of what's happening in today's world is, we've got deep fakes, we've got, the manipulation of information in so many different ways. We've got biases, in the AI systems, and again, this is a good example of, where is security in this? Security is asking the question, how can people get manipulated? How do we ensure that we as an organization are not manipulating people?
Mhm.
How do we make sure that there's ethics and integrity associated with our use of data, which is being used to train these AI models? So all of these things are just those are the kinds of questions that as a security person, you have to be able to ask.
Right. And you have a very, I feel like, diverse background. You come from a lot of experiences. And so, and something that really intrigued me was I heard you were a military spouse and you talked a little bit about that. So you've experienced security on a very personal level as well. So how has that part of your identity helped shape your understanding of what it means to be secure?
I think, well, my family were very, one of a family that has historically always felt that our responsibility was to give back. And so my dad was in the Navy, my sister's in the Navy, my brother-in-law's in the Navy. It's actually my ex-husband was in the Marine Corps. I've got one son who was in the Marine Corps, just got out. Now he's a police officer in DC. I've got another son in the Army. So this is our family. It's our DNA. We believe we've been blessed in so many different ways. And, we believe that our responsibility is to, give back to the community, and the community that supported us, and the community that protects us in so many ways. And I think a lot of the folks that I work with in security, we're all very motivated by that kind of altruism, that, we all want to protect one another, and we want to protect our communities, and we want to protect the country. And it is, as I said, it's kind of a characteristic that you see that. And you also find in security that a lot of people have these like death defying hobbies, like jumping from planes or racing cars, or we're really good at taking risk, not just managing risk. We take risk. But I think, how has that informed me? I think it's taken me into this field where I feel every day that I am doing something good.
Mhm.
Right. Every day I can wake up and I can say that I've made the world a little bit better. And that's a pretty awesome field to be in.
And just to jump off of that, so I was actually a fellow at Girl Security, and national security was just very unconventional in my family. It's very much become a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, and thankfully my sister took the doctor bullet for me. So that's a path I have to consider. But it wasn't until I joined the organization that kind of opened my eyes to like security and cybersecurity, and then combining my passion for like the information ecosystem, and it really helped cultivate something. And then I became a mentee, and now I'm a program assistant there. So it's really full circle and it feels so good to pay it forward. It feels so good to pay it forward and to give back to something that has helped you monumentally. So I completely understand. And I have one last question for you.
Sure.
And so many of our girl security participants are just starting to imagine themselves as future defenders of national security. What's your message to them, especially those who feel maybe uncertain or unseen?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say, I mean, there's good opportunities out there for you to participate. I think joining the military is a great way, by the way, of getting good for those of you who are thinking about Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, whatever the military service is. There are some fabulous, fabulous training programs that are available through the military. And it's a really good opportunity for you, not just to get kind of the practical experience, but then to be able to take that practical experience and get a really good job afterwards.
Mhm.
Because one of the things in security is you do need to kind of slog through it. You need to get practical experience, and I know that's the hardest thing. A lot of folks that graduate, they don't. They're. I know after you spent 4 years or 6 years or whatever it is, really focusing in the industry, trying to get that first job can be super hard
Mhm.
because the people that are interviewing you want you to like have done the job before. And so that's why, being in the military is actually really good because they put you to work in a practical setting and you get that experience. But even if you don't go and take like a public sector job, state, local government, or in the military, where again it's easier for you to find that experience. What I would say is any job that you take, any volunteer activity you take, and believe me, there's lots of schools, lots of nonprofit organizations, your local churches, whatever it is, they need help. Volunteer. Any experience that you can gain by yourself, whatever that is, it will help you in your career, right? Get that practical grounding so that you can get that job, or alternatively, again, it will give back to that community. Everything. I want you to like think about it this way. One of the ways in which attackers successfully get into corporations is, to give you an example, is they will attack small like nonprofit organizations because they know two things. One, nonprofits have no security, so it's very easy to get into the systems and get the kind of the roles of people who've donated. That's one. Two is they know that the people that donate often use one username and password, and that password and username is the one they use for work. So
Oh.
if I grab the passwords and usernames from the nonprofit organization or from the church or whatever the case may be, I can use that to
Mhm.
attack the organization.
Mhm.
See this again and again and again. So think about it this way. Even if you're in high school and you're thinking about cyber and you're providing some help in your local, whatever it is, that is actually helpful from a national security perspective, believe it or not, because you're protecting the institutions that process, all of our payments, that provide healthcare services, that provide energy services, et cetera. So you always have to realize that whatever you're doing in this field, there is a national security element to it.
And I just want to add, you talked about volunteering, and I think that just goes back to one of your core principles was always giving back because, I just thought that was such a fascinating point to make. And I also want to end this by saying that I think your journey is a testament that cybersecurity isn't just about technology, it's about people, purpose, and perseverance.
Yep.
So I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your story with us. And to everyone listening, your mission can start today. Thank you so much, Kris.
Thank you.